My guest today is someone I had the pleasure of working with quite closely over a period of 2 years on a groundbreaking project that no one really knows about yet. This was just before the pandemic, and I hope this interview will contribute to continuing our collaboration on some level, from Finland to Latin America in specific, but with the larger world in mind in general. Janne Hietanummi is the Development Director of Valkeakoski Vocational College and a pioneer in Finland with educational technology for vocational education and training. Janne, I'm very happy to welcome you to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
A pleasure, a pleasure. So let's start with your background, because you have a very strong background, practically speaking, which I see usually is missing in education in general. So would you like to start with your story from the early days in your career as an engineer, or even since first starting out as at UPM while doing your master's?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that was a long time ago, something like 25, even more years ago. So I had started studying engineering in England, actually. I came back to Finland in 1999, I think it was, or was it 2000, and continued. And towards the end of the studies, I then started doing my master's thesis, and that was actually with Valmet, or Metso Corporation back then. But I was working at the UPM Kymmene company also. So from those experiences, I think I pretty much have a strong background in heavy industry type of things. And then in 2004, I just somehow ended up as a teacher. I mean, working as a teacher.
Yeah, that
VAAO.
transition is interesting because
Yes.
you ended up as a lecturer first.
Mm-hmm.
And if you tell us about that transition and how your career became as an educator before you actually became even a director of education.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I was really happy with my job back then, but somehow I just wanted to try something new, and there was a possibility, and I just ended up taking it. And I have a lot of teachers in my, let's say, in my closest ones. I mean, among them, and I guess that might have sort of contributed to the decision back then. And well, I started teaching, and I did that for a long time, something like 6-7 years ago, years combined. But then at some point there were new opportunities within the same organization, and I just decided I should try, and that was the first time I started doing managerial kind of stuff. And that was it was very different to what it is today, but I'm pretty happy with the choices I made back then. It was something new again. And after that, I've had the pleasure of starting 2 or 3 different positions, still within the same organization. And here I am doing development stuff currently. But I have to say that I've been doing or working with really sort of like development-oriented mindset throughout my whole teaching career. I've always been trying something new, whether working as a teacher or as a manager of some sort. And I guess that's pretty much why I ended up to my current position.
And could you tell us more about that transition? How did you first start with technology in education? Also being one of the first users of many of the innovative technological tools in Finland for vocational training, etc. So, because you transitioned from director of education to director of technology, where you presently work at that time, and did you have a natural curiosity, early adopter mentality, or were there concrete needs to make it practical?
Well, I think there were needs, really. I mean, the digital tools really provide so many solutions to many of the challenges that there are, and those were really evident already back then, something like 10 years ago. And we've always had really good partnerships with other Finnish VET providers, and Yeah, I think it's been important that we've had these networks and we've developed things together as well. And yeah, we've tried quite a lot of things. I mean, some people may think that even too many things, but then again, I've been of the opinion that you need to try to see. And currently, I think we are using pretty good tools, and obviously they're not going to be the final or the last ones we'll end up using, but currently we are pretty happy. We've used, I'd say, 3 or 4 different sets of tools throughout the past 10 years, and we've always made a clear decision as to what tools to use, and whenever needed, we've changed those decisions. And currently, again, we have a strategy written up to sort of guide us forwards, so that we don't have too many things going on at the same time. And I mean, there's plenty to develop, even within just 1 or 2 approaches. So it's important not to have too many approaches.
And that brings me to ask you really about what your filters or criteria have been towards the final selection of the tools you actually use, because it's a very good approach to test a lot, but test it fast, but then maybe not get too technical and have too much. Because having an engineering background, I see there's so many technical engineers out there that promote technology without understanding really the why and the pedagogical need beyond the, let's say, practical technical need. And what has been your filter, and how have you reached, let's say, these insights? Of course, being a teacher in Finland is one main assistant to that kind of thinking. I've always said that Finnish teachers are usually, or have been since when technology started coming into the classrooms and didn't really come so much into the Finnish classroom, is that Finnish teachers were good pedagogical filters towards what actually ends up in the classroom. But what's your personal story before we go to the national level in Finland?
Personal story regarding those decisions?
Yeah, the filters, the criteria, because it's good to test a lot, but how do you end up selecting just a few? Yeah. What are the criteria for that?
Well, first of all, I think it is very important to involve your colleagues, other partners maybe as well. So those are not just my decisions. I mean, we've been thinking about different solutions, their pros and cons, and just made the decisions together as much as possible. And let's say having teachers giving their feedback when trying something is always very important. But then again, there may be some other issues to consider as well. So yeah, well, to put it short, in short terms, I would just say that as much in cooperation as possible, but sometimes you just have to make decisions to get things going, because there may be too many opinions at once.
Yes, I'm also thinking about, okay, so the feedback with your colleagues who actually will use the products, but also regarding pedagogical research maybe behind the products, or actual user assistance, like when you have students trying to do something in the vocational education, it's more practically visible, the need and the benefit, which might not always be the case in more academically oriented settings.
Yeah, that there may be really important functionalities within the, I mean, if we're talking about software, that just have to be there, and that is always something to consider, and might actually be the most determining factor in making these decisions. But then again, feedback, user friendliness, and also what the persons behind these tools actually contribute. I mean, if their training sets are really excellent, that also might have an impact on it, and whether they are willing to develop further the needs that we may have. while these functionalities are not yet present there. That could be also a contributing factor.
Great. Yeah, we might touch more on this when we talk about our Latin American case, which will be highlighted soon, and the needs and the products that were selected for that project that we worked on together. But first, let's talk about the Finnish vocational education and training in general. How has it been built up? What's its advantages and the role of the work-based learning approach that is very, very strongly emphasized in Finland, and that I think many countries are not really yet or haven't in recent years understood the great benefits of, and it hasn't really been as appreciated as in Finland, since we have maybe half of the population going to vocational education in Finland, which is a very respected field, versus the academics, which only now people are understanding is not really enough.
Yeah, well, personally, I think the system here is very good. It has many, many advantages. Well, first of all, it is a competence-based system, which means that the skills you acquire while studying, those matter. And whenever you've acquired those skills, or you've learned the stuff, basically, then you just demonstrate that you know your stuff, so that you've learned. And it doesn't really matter how you get the knowledges or the skills, rather. And yeah, that is one of the factors that makes the Finnish system really flexible. So, I mean, one issue that always is somewhat confusing to many, let's say, foreigners when I explain how this system works is that if you have one part of a qualification, and then I start explaining that you could complete it while working in a, let's say, a factory or any workplace, basically, or you could do the same thing in a classroom, and you'll end up with the same result, or you're supposed to end up with the same result, and completion of the of this unit or the part of the qualification, and that is always something that really, I mean, it's really hard to understand how it is possible. Because, well, first of all, the workplaces are different. And then again, some people are longer periods of time there. And some people just shorter ones. And some people just spend most of the time in a classroom. And you still end up with the same thing. So basically, this could sound that there isn't really a system behind completing vocational qualification or these qualifications in Finland, but there really is. I mean, there is a national level curriculum, but that only includes the topics or the contents of the qualification and the assessment criteria. But how you actually end up organizing the whole thing and how the students learn, those are really up to the schools and even to the teachers to decide. And we trust in Finland that the VET providers, I mean, that we know what to do. We also trust our teachers. So that enables this flexibility within the system. And whenever done correctly, I think it is a very good thing, even in terms of the quality, because that also enables taking into consideration the different ways the students learn. Some like to learn by doing, some like to learn by listening, etc., etc. And yeah, you can just pick the best one. Yeah, more about the system here. I mentioned this competence-based approach. Quite often it's really practical. At least in my organization, we try to minimize the theoretical parts. Not to say that we don't teach theory. I mean, we try to incorporate it as much as possible, but not in the, let's say, traditional sense of just reading and reading and reading, but rather by doing something while just trying to find ways to incorporate the whole thing. into action. And something else, it provides really good possibilities to learn throughout your career, since it is flexible. I mean, you can always go on and complete another qualification or a part of a qualification while working already. And the flexibility is just endless.
Maybe you can even add here the more holistic perspective of the education system in general in Finland, as it relates to the vocational training curriculum, that many people actually start with the vocational path, but then at some point they can come back to the academia and do like a master's or let's say even a PhD, but really being a practical vocational professional. Can you put that into perspective? Like how do you see it? Like it's not just two paths that divide and then there's no connection, but really that there's what the connection is between the academia and the vocational path.
Yes. So after the basic school, when the youngsters are something like 16 years old or around that age, there are two paths to follow or to choose, and they actually have to choose either one of those. There is currently a law saying that everybody under 18 has to choose either of these or do something similar. But almost 50% choose vocational, which is rather rare. I mean, quite often it's something like 65-35 rather, or even a bigger difference. But 50-50, close anyway, is typical in Finland. And why that is, I personally think that the fact that the students can always come back to further studies or continue directly after the vocational qualification into the higher level qualifications, that there are no sort of boundaries or limits in this vocational path. So that certainly is one of the factors, I think. Because if there was a limit that you'd have to do a whole lot of extra to be able to continue your studies in a university or other places, I think that might scare people away. But in Finland, that is not the case. But this also means that as part of the vocational qualifications, there will be some general subjects as well, like mathematics, etc., languages, and so forth. Other things, I think that the fact that vocational education is, it is highly regarded here in Finland. I think it's one of the factors is that the teachers working within vocational qualification, the vocational education and training, they are highly educated. So you actually need a master's degree or something similar in most cases. And you also need working experience from your own field. So it's not just theoretical background, you also need really the actual experience from your own field. And you'll need some teacher's education. Official, there's this sort of like a 60 credit package for, if I remember correctly, 60. I don't know, we might want to check that, but still, there is a official system to get your qualification. And if you have all those covered, then you can work officially as a vocational teacher. And, in some cases, like myself, I started without this qualification or these teacher studies. And then I just completed the studies while working as a teacher already. So again, we are at this flexibility topic here. I mean, it's not just vocational education, but also other levels are pretty flexible in Finland. So especially this teacher education part. And still more about, you had a follow-up question. What was it again?
About that, I would like to ask and only comment basically that it's so important that we have this practical experience, like teachers who have actually lived and worked with the field that they're teaching, because otherwise it's not really connected to the reality. And how can you gain respect from students, let's say in all fields, if the teacher is only, let's say, giving information? And that is kind of something that you can find by yourself outside of the entire school system. So the practical experience is what also gives insights, and you can tell stories from real life. That is what really engages students to want to learn when you're like inspiring students or even being a role model in an industry. And so far the teaching industry has been, maybe that was also part of you having a lot of friends being teachers and why you were interested in going to the teaching career, because the teaching profession has been very highly respected in Finland for many, many years. And for this to continue in a digital world where you don't really have to listen to the teacher to learn something, we have to also make sure that we have these practical insights and experiences and an added value of actually why we need to go back to the classroom or be in the school setting to develop.
And also regarding this working experience, yeah, it is important because working life cooperation is one really big and important part of Finnish vocational education and training. So on average, I mean, this is just an average number, but let's say within a 3-year qualification, the students could spend starting from a few months up to a couple of years in workplaces and learning there. And that means that the teachers have to have good cooperation networks with these companies. They need to be able to assist, guide, make sure that everything goes according to plan while the students are at the workplaces. And also the workplaces have appointed people to supervise the students while they are there. So we have 2 different models for learning at workplaces, and that again is very flexible, but also since it is pretty well structured and when conducted according to plan, it's a very good learning experience, and also a way to get your first job for a lot of students.
Can you summarize those 2 ways of collaborating with companies or doing your, let's say, work-based learning experience before we go to our very specific Uruguay case and how you actually redesigned the Finnish curriculum to be adapted based on the flexibility it has, but also looking at the local needs of the country of Uruguay.
Yeah.
Let's start first with the 2 different options there.
Yeah. So the more common one is called a training agreement, but basically what it means that the students go to workplaces that are relevant to their qualification, and they learn things that the curriculum states that they should learn. And of course there's a more detailed planning before that as to what those methods and tasks at this particular workplace actually is going to be, so that the learning can actually take place. And in the end of it, they will just do a demonstration that is a practical test where they really demonstrate that they have learned the things mentioned in the curriculum. And people are not paid any salaries or anything like this, but they are still abiding by the rules of the workplace. All the safety issues are covered, all the insurances are involved, etc. And the other one is actually a paid period at a workplace. That's called apprenticeship, and they are actually being employed by the company while they are there, but still they have these learning targets. They are supposed to learn certain things while they are there, and there will be a demonstration as well in the end of it. And both of these models can cover just 1 unit or several units, or basically the whole qualification in extreme cases at the workplaces. So you can imagine that the teachers need to know the workplace specifics as well, And the workplace instructors, they have to know how to guide the students, and they need to know certain things about their education as well. So it is in some ways a complex thing, because you need to know a lot of things. But then again, in Finland, they've been doing this for years and years. So there is a system for it. So
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good then segue to the actual case, which brings this to practice. And we know that there's a lot of legislation being changed in the entire education system in many countries in the world. And we had this opportunity to join a project in Uruguay where there were some needs specified or identified, and maybe in connection also to regulation reform. And let's start with your approach to this project, what the project was about, the targets that were, let's say, identified, and how you then actually started with these different phases of redesigning the Finnish curriculum to be adaptable to the Uruguayan setting, and then from there forward.
All right. Yeah, well, first of all, it was a big project where there was one part that was pretty much counting on the let's say, designing the Finnish vocational education and training for the needs of the Uruguayan customer there. And I was designing that part. And the other parts of the project included teacher training and so on. At the end of the project, I also participated in this teacher training part. I was, for example, showing how to use certain digital tools and giving other types of training regarding the evaluation or assessment of the students within a pilot that we conducted at the end of it. So so the customer wanted to implement a Finnish system, Finnish vocational education and training based system, and I mean, I really liked all the people and all that. It was really nice project. I mean, here in Finland, all our partners and also the Uruguayan partners, and we managed to get the same mindset in the end. And although we had this good sort of chemistry going on, it was pretty challenging to get the message across as to what the Finnish vocational education and training really means. Because if you do not have these processes of learning at workplaces, it's really difficult to just start from there, because you will need cooperation between the school and the workplaces. And also this competence-based approach that was really somewhat challenging to understand what it means in practice and what it means in their case, because the customer had really always measured things in time as to how many hours needs to be studied, or as to how many hours need to be spent within a certain topic, etc. Whereas the Finnish system was competence-based, meaning that you do not have to spend the same time doing certain things. And in fact, not everybody has to do the same thing. If they already know the stuff, they can go and demonstrate their skills right away. So these kinds of discussions were really helpful in the beginning of the project, because I quite quickly realized that that there were some misunderstandings as to how to implement a Finnish system somewhere else. And but yeah, pretty soon after the start of the project, I think we were realizing that what the goals were, and it ended up, I mean, the model ended up so that it was based on the Finnish system, but not entirely. So we had just basically taken the best parts of the Finnish system and implemented those for the Uruguayan purposes. And there were some other misunderstandings as well.
Yeah, before we go to
Yeah.
successes, maybe you can highlight a couple of main challenges
Yeah.
more that you might have identified and that you would want to avoid next time, maybe when we embark on something like this, or that could maybe be avoided by restructuring the approach.
Yeah, one of the targets of the project was to create a curriculum. And I don't know if I mentioned this already, but the field or professional field that was supposed to be covered in this project was processing industry, which is my background as well. So I was quite happy to be working in that regard as well. So in Finland, curriculum, as I mentioned earlier, means that we state the contents or the criteria as to how to evaluate the contents, and also the list of units what should be covered, and so forth. And we have this credit-based system also, which are not based on time, as I also mentioned. And it seemed when I had done the first draft for this curriculum that the customer had a completely different idea as to what a curriculum is. And it was good that we noticed that very early on, because then I just realized that I have to make other plans as well. But it ended
I would maybe stress that we actually created a content design phase into the entire process that maybe you hadn't had planned before that.
Yeah, it wasn't actually
would have been or became, let's say, an official part of the curriculum in Uruguay then.
Yeah, that's right. So the curriculum ended up in the same format as they are in Finland, that there are these competence requirements and then there are the criteria and so forth. So it looked pretty similar to any Finnish curriculum. But we also created, as you mentioned, as a separate part of the whole project, these implementation plans or pedagogical plans. So I actually created 2 sets of examples as to how to conduct the teaching or how to learn at workplaces, the same topics or the topics mentioned in the curriculum. And I think those were really helpful. So having the Finnish type of curriculum and also a plan as to how to implement the whole thing, those combined, I think were really helpful for the customer to see how they could continue planning later on. Because it turned out at the end that the teachers involved in the project really had grasped the idea of conducting these units or teaching these units in different ways for different sorts of students, which was then quite important that the logic from Finland was actually conveyed there, because now they can start doing the same thing. So if they are, let's say, adult students, they can have one model and another one for younger people. And so perhaps that was one of the challenges, and also I could add a third one, and that refers to using digital tools. In Finland, we try to have digital tools as something to add to normal pedagogical approaches, and also to use it as a method of monitoring as to how the students are actually advancing in their studies. And since we were implementing this work-based learning in Uruguay as well, we chose a system that really supports that process as well. So, I mean, the customer, I think, had the idea that if we make a really, really visual packed with content, a type of platform that could solve the whole thing by themselves. But in the end, it is, I mean, the process is going to need teachers. And especially if you are having the Finnish approach, where really the teachers think as to how to choose the pedagogical methods for different sets of students and how to learn at workplaces and so on. So yeah, well, those challenges I think were the biggest one to start with. But as I said, we had a really good team at both ends, and yeah, we ended up with a pretty good result, I think.
Yeah, can you highlight some of the successes and the really key learning points also for you? Successes also for you or for the entire project, and then let's say learning points for you individually.
Yeah. So for me, individually, I think all of these challenges that I just mentioned were really learning points for me as well, because I mean, you might take things for granted. I mean, if you're a part of a system for a long time, you might not recognize that it's not self-explanatory for other people. So in that sense, it was really important to see that whenever there is going to be another project like this, hopefully in the future, you really need to emphasize these things very early on in the project, so that everybody really understands what all the parts are going to mean in the end. Other learning topics were, I think, involved with at least partially with pedagogical approaches. I mean, the Finnish teacher education, at least in the context of vocational education, we try to, at least, at VAAO, I mean, hands-on approach is really effective in most cases when you are learning practical things. And to highlight examples as to how to incorporate hands-on into many different things, I really had to think as to how to give examples of that, so that the customer team really understands how they could do the same thing. And one, I think, pretty nice idea was when I was teaching or giving some sort of introduction to a digital platform having loads and loads of professional content on one of the themes of the curriculum. So I combined demonstrating what information is going to be found there and how they could be learned, while recording everything that I show, and continuing the recording while I built an instruction manual to ThingLink. So I combined 3 different topics into one online meeting, and we ended up with a finished digital manual with video content, text, and let's say paths to explore things via using the ThingLink. So I think, I mean, that I think was a pretty good approach. At least customers was really satisfied that we saved a lot of time of not doing the same thing for, 3 times over. We just did it once and spent, let's say, a couple of hours instead of 6 hours, so to speak. And also some of the practical methods of teaching. I mean, one of the units was using digital tools and software and so on. And I was thinking of practical examples, what they could do, so that they could follow in the footsteps of, let's say, Finnish approaches within Finnish VET. So I suggested that maybe teaching video editing, they could use a drone, make some videos of the group. That was actually the pilot at the end of the project. And also photos, and then edit those photos and pictures and build a ThingLink sort of digital kind of collection of those materials. So and they actually did it, and I saw the final outcome, what they did, and it was excellent. So those were really skilled teachers in the end, these Uruguayan partners. So that I thought was also pretty nice. That, I mean, if I suggested something, they actually tried it, and quite a lot of times the end result was pretty much what I thought it could be, and even better. So yeah, some pretty nice success stories, and getting this pilot actually done, so that it wasn't just a piece of paper or a thick, let's say, pile of paper with, I mean, this curriculum thing and all the attachments, these other plans and all of those, but they actually managed to do a pilot using those. Was really important for me as well. And at that point, I mean, I just wanted to continue the project, and but then we know what happened with COVID and stuff, and there were some other issues as well. I mean, we had some changes in the project teams, and all of those together, I think, just put the project on hold. And
yeah, I think there was a change of government as well in Uruguay. So big changes, a lot of changes, and a big
on hold was actually not the correct term here, because we finished the project as planned, but there were plans to continue, and especially with these workplace processes. But yeah, then we had these challenges, and
exactly. I would say that it's standby. So let's see what happens.
Yeah.
But before we continue to the next part of the episode, I'd like to ask you to highlight a little bit your pedagogical approach with using, in this case, ThingLink, and you had another Finnish product in use, also related to the curriculum, that would be helpful. Can you highlight a little bit those tools and the successes with them? And you mentioned ThingLink already, but the pedagogical approach when selecting a tool, which is the key part. So we had very technically skilled teachers and fantastic people part of the team. They also recommended and selected a couple of tools, non-Finnish tools. So, but if you highlight the Finnish tools first.
Yeah, ThingLink was chosen because we wanted to add something really visual to the project. There was a problem that the students were not motivated. I mean, that's what the customer actually said. I mean, even though in the pilot, what I was following, the students were really motivated, but generally speaking, there's a problem with motivation and finishing off what they start. Regarding,
I think it's a global problem.
It is a global, yes, exactly, like that. So we wanted to have as many tools as possible that would actually give something, let's say, visual, something really interesting, perhaps something new. And that was the purpose of that. And it's also a good tool to just, let's say, compile the let's say, digital content or other content that the students create, or even the teachers create, which they could then use as part of their teaching. But as an LMS system, we ended up using a Workseed, which is a Finnish system designed for a lot of purposes, but especially to support the workplace or work-based learning. It has really nice diary function, so that the students can actually just, tick boxes as to what kind of topics they've learned each day, when they started, when they finished. There's also possibilities to write text, take photos if it is allowed by the companies, videos, etc. And the workplace instructors also have access to this system, so that they can give feedback really easily to the students and also teachers. And so there's sort of like a three-way communication made really simple within this system. And you can give instructions for the demonstrations. You can evaluate the demonstrations or assess, I think it's a better word. I'm not quite sure what the official one is, assess or evaluate, either one. The demonstrations, and it also gives quite nice analytical information as to what the students have already accomplished, whether they are late with some assignments, things like that.
And also customized for the new curriculum.
Exactly. So we could implement the contents of the new curriculum there, and also the evaluation criteria, so that they were parts. That they were a part of the LMS system. And what was really nice in this project as well was that we could have it in 2 languages there. So you could just press a button and you'd have the Spanish translations there. And having the texts in English was really helpful for the Finnish partners. I mean, the ones of us who were working together with the system. So that was pretty nice as well.
Yeah, great.
Mm-hmm.
So to finish off, let's talk more about technology and pedagogical technology. And now in a world of technological chaos, in my mind, we have a couple of themes that have been or still are, let's say, on fashion, basically. Like you have XR, AR, the metaverse. With ThinkLink, for example, we had an approach to the immersive learning environments, and they built that, let's say, towards the metaverse more or less as well. But in general, and then AI to even take things to an even more complex but maybe interesting level. What are your, let's say, thoughts as a very technical educator from a curriculum perspective to a practical implementation perspective, and also very much interested in technology in general? So you can tell us your personal opinion or thoughts or in general recommendations as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those technologies you mentioned, AR, VR, also HoloLens nowadays. I mean, we've tried those in VAAO now for 2 or 3 years, and we are pretty happy with them. It was pretty challenging to get started, but like I said in the beginning of this interview, that it's important to have support from the, let's say, the provider. And so we got our first major system developed. I mean, it was pretty good, or a pretty large project that we had with 3D Bear, a Finnish company specializing in VR and AR, etc. And they really had a nice approach to teaching us how to get started. They also helped us to pick the right equipment to start off, and also help design our first major content topics as well. And that was for social and healthcare. So we actually created a game for students to well, it really is a game actually. So there's an actual case they have to solve, and they are graded as they go on within the game. And we collected feedback from the students. It was very good feedback. And while doing that, I mean, having your VR headset on, it gives you this really nice experience. But it actually ended up that while we were spending a lot of time creating the game, it is actually really good content also without these VR headsets. So it is just very good digital material to be used by just a browser, and which means that it is really easy to start using also with a really large group of students at once, so that you don't need a truckload of VR headsets to get started. So that was perhaps one of the biggest learning experiences. Well, not a learning experience, but just an idea that regardless of what you develop, when you do it really nicely, it's going to be good, because you can use it for other purposes as well. At least in this case, it was so. We've also developed things using AR, and that's for our business studies. So it's like using AR to build, let's say, stores with different items to be sold. We have scanners so that we can scan objects, which then can be used digitally within this software. And we are now using, we have our first cases using a HoloLens as well, and that is really, really interesting, because you have your two hands free of any devices, so that you can actually just read what comes, what information or questions or whatever comes to the HoloLens goggles, and continue with your hands. And that is something I think will be very useful and very common in the future in all sorts of workplaces. So it's an important skill to learn for the students as well. Yeah, so VR. One thing I could mention. We are using VR also for safety types of topics. So that's that's an outside service we've sort of leased for ourselves. It has really nice exercises for let's say, if there's a fire, as to what to do if there's a really violent let's say a customer coming, so what to do with that type of customer. All sorts of safety issues that might be rather risky to learn in other ways, or just boring by reading from books. So you can actually do the same thing with really with an immersive experience at the same time. And we've actually found out, this is not a scientific research or anything like that, certain topics that are bound to be boring, if they are visual or interesting enough, even the students with let's say some concentration or trouble being able to concentrate for longer time periods, they really are able to focus for a while and thereby learn much better. And we've actually been discussing this topic, that we really need some scientific research on this topic. And I think we are getting somewhere with that now. So a local university is actually going to start investigating this, and we are going to be a part of this investigation. And hopefully we'll learn a lot as to what types of students will benefit the most from these technologies, and in what instances and what sorts of topics could be used there. And that is something that we know for a fact very little right now, but it's quite nice that there's going to be investigation on it, or research rather.
Yes, and that's very important for the personalized approach that Finland has been well recognized for, and that we need to continue in an optimal way, whatever technology we use. And what are your thoughts on the creative process, let's say, versus the content consumption that is happening? You're creating great content in these technologies, and what in education, well, in general, I think the creative process is so crucial that people might not take into account always when they use modern technology, mainly for consumption of knowledge that is ready-made. But for vocational education and training, what's your thoughts on that when you have this competence-based model still as the end goal to develop competences? And how would your approach be to these more modern technologies?
Yeah, I think those will support this competence-based approach. And before I go to this, you mentioned these ways of for different types of students to learn. Let's say those experiences that I mentioned happen to with people with special needs support, and those could offer some solutions there as well. But as I said, hopefully there's going to be scientific research on it, and we'll know much more. But yeah, I think these technologies will be helpful, because sometimes when the students go to the workplaces, they may not be able to start doing certain things. I mean, if they're required to use really, let's say, big machines or expensive tools or whatever, it might be that it takes time to actually get started with those. But they could actually practice beforehand by using these tools, and thereby perhaps get access to these types of tasks quicker when they go to the workplaces. And also regarding risky topics, nobody has to risk anything if they can, practice the same thing digitally.
Like simulation, for simulation purposes.
Yes, exactly. And it's going to save a lot of time as well, because, I mean, even raw material, let's say an example like welding. You need metal, you need this and that, you need equipment. And eventually, I mean, if there's a large group of students, it's going to cost a lot of money. If you can do part of that training by using virtual tools, it's going to save a lot of money in the end. In the long term. Yeah, and it gives variety to pedagogical approaches, and eventually I think all of those combined will be beneficial regarding the competence-based learning as well.
Yeah.
And you can actually incorporate this game type of thinking much easier there as well, which means that the students can explore different things in a really motivating way as well. So yeah, I see a lot of benefits there. So yeah.
Yeah, before we finish off, can you also touch upon the subject of data, the information that you need to gather and understand for, let's say, quality learning outcomes? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the Finnish VET providers are actually required to have a quality management system of some sort. It doesn't have to be certified. Like in VAAO, we have a officially certified ISO 9001 system, but it doesn't have to be. But everybody has to follow their quality. That's a certain thing in Finland, and the officials are actually going to make sure that you do that. So, I mean, there are external evaluations organized by the FINEC. It's like Finnish, well, a national entity making all sorts of evaluations. And of course, the vet providers evaluate themselves. We collect all sorts of data. There are automated interfaces from our student management systems to reporting systems. We know the actual number of students in real time. We know how many of them are having some sort of issues with graduating according to plan. We know how many have actually dropped out, let's say, during the past month or a week even, not to mention the year. And we know basically quite extensively as to what is going on with the students. And a part of that information goes automatically to the national level systems as well. So there are a lot of information systems involved in Finnish VET. And it wasn't always like that. These national level systems that I mentioned have been there for a few years now in their current form. And they are now working quite nicely. But there were some challenges to get to this point. Also, regarding the quality, there's even a national level feedback system. So whenever a student starts at a Finnish vocational school, the student will be sent a link to a survey. And whenever they graduate or finish off their qualification or partial qualification, they will again get a link with, to a survey. And also the workplace instructors will get links to a survey, and the workplace representatives. And all of that data is collected by this national entity, and our funding is somewhat based on that as well. I mean, a small portion of it though, but still, it does have an impact on our funding. So quality management as a whole and using data, they are really important part of Finnish VET currently. And that is something I think is different to many locations as well. I mean, I was giving a presentation. It was a European partner just a couple of weeks ago, and I described how we use data and how we monitor our activities and all that. And I think it came as a surprise to many as to how advanced it actually is. It's like a private company basically measuring their activities and processes. We have key performance indicators and we actually monitor those, and we have processes for continuous improvement. And it is an important part nowadays.
Definitely, but that is specific to the VET industry and sector in Finland.
Yeah, and higher level education as well, but not so much for the general upper secondary school.
And the question is if it, usually things work quite well in Finland, maybe too well for things to be requesting or requiring a change, but maybe this could be adopted in a private company setting as well if it gets national recognition. So we have in education technology sector in Finland a player that is a private entity that was formed by pedagogues and so on. And I'll make a shout out to Education Alliance Finland for becoming, let's say, a very recognized entity for quality certifications in general in Finland, but also on a global scale. So I think you don't have to really wait for governments to put into place these kind of entities, but really I think there's space for private players as well, and pedagogues and teachers even to take initiatives and start innovating wherever they feel is needed.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And also one thing I could mention, it's just the cooperation between the vet providers. I mean, whether it is a project-funded cooperation or just by, just an existing network and people know each other, there is a lot of cooperation.
Yeah, let's finish with this. You had a peer conference webinar recently. Can you tell us something about that? Is it related to what you just said?
Yeah, peer review?
Yes.
Yes. Well, that is something that we do. I mean, that's one form of cooperation. But also
And quality management, I guess.
yes, it is. Yeah.
Indirectly.
So that means that, for example, VAAO has something like 6, 7, 8 other partners that are participating in this peer review thing. So we always create 1 or 2 year program where basically each partner wants to be reviewed once, and all the peers or these evaluators come from other schools from this network. And we just organize the whole thing. We set dates, we train more peers so that there is enough of these evaluators at our disposal, and then we conduct these peer reviews. And basically it means that we give feedback from one school to another, and that is really helpful. It's like an external audit, which is just, I mean, we organize it by ourselves so that we go and audit each other, so to speak. It's not an audit. I mean, we also give we give both points for improvement and also really these points of excellence or points of the highlights of their advantages. So that is one thing we do. And now in cooperation with the national level entities, we've had the pleasure of participating in an international project as well. So this means that our school was reviewed by Finnish and outside, I mean, peers from other countries. Yeah, just lost the words there. But that was a really interesting experience as well. And I was actually then working as a peer in another country, at least twice already. So we are doing the same thing, but internationally. And that gives a whole new perspective to this process, and it really enriches all the experiences that you'll see. And yeah, that is a very effective method of quality management and continuous improvement. So
fantastic, Janne.
yeah.
Yeah, I think both these perspectives are very important to work on simultaneously, the autonomy of what you're doing, but also the collaboration part. So you don't work in isolation, but still without being directed towards a standardized process. So any final recommendations from your part to VET educators around the world, especially now when we are living in a technological chaos, I would say? What should people maybe try to think about, not to be too stressed or too scared about the technological development moving too fast?
Yeah. So I would just say that people shouldn't be scared or worried if new things come by. I sometimes hear that the teachers may feel that they are not needed anymore. Or let's say that in this Uruguay project, some teachers, I think, felt that if the students are going to be learning at workplaces, then teachers are not going to be needed anymore. I would say that it's just the contrary, or if not contrary, then it's just going to be different. So people shouldn't be afraid. I mean, things are happening no matter what. I mean, you shouldn't always be against of new things or oppose new things. Just learn to cope with new things. That is my advice. The change is going to happen anyway, no matter what. So and especially this teaching world, that there is always, I think, some sort of worry that some new tool or some new process or system is going to be replacing teachers. I don't think so. It's just going to get different. And as long as teachers see that and learn new things, as part of their profession, they should be fine, and I think they are going to be needed even more in the future. Even though the internet and all this, I mean, talk about AI and all that, it is going to bring new solutions and new tools and possibilities for individuals to be learning by themselves, but still you are going to need professionals, and you shouldn't worry, just learn new things and you'll be fine.
Excellent, Janne. So where can people find you if they want to reach out to you and your advice?
Mm-hmm. So for example, LinkedIn is one place. Yeah. So I'm not really very, very active in social media otherwise, but LinkedIn is one place where I'm at. So that's one way to approach. And also via internet, it's VAAO.fi or FI. So those could be two methods. So
Great. So VAAO.fi and Janne Hietanummi. So thank you very much for this fantastic conversation, and I look very much forward to continuing to talk, maybe also off camera, and see how we can collaborate in the future.
It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.